On November the 5th of 1569, when D. Sebastião entered Évora for the first time, a city regarded as the second of his realms, the elderly humanist André de Rezende greeted him with these words: "Come at a most fortunate hour, our king, our mirror in which we see ourselves, our precious jewel, of whom we boast greatly, the hope of the kingdom, for whom we were born to serve, given to us by God, asked by us to God, with you in health, prosperity, and everything that can be called good." On 27th January 1573, a respected man from the town of Silves addressed the monarch and recalled, "May our Lord grant that, just as your highness was given to us, amid the tears and prayers of your vassals, for the consolation of this realm, so he may lengthen your life for many years, with many victories over your enemies and the increase of your kingdoms and states." In Tavira, on the following 31st of January, the prior who gave the entrance prayer declared that Dinu Sebastião had been chosen by God to be king before he was born, and he added that if any ruler could be called a king by the grace of God, your highness is such a one, because kings are born from the mother's wombs, and your highness, beyond that, was born from the merits of the many tears, prayers, and sacrifices that your people offered to God at the hour of your birth. How often must the young man have heard this reference to his miraculous birth, born, as it were, by God's will, and by the supplications and tears of his subjects, and how much more so since he came into the world on the day associated with the glorious martyr Saint Sebastian. Would not such an atmosphere be enough to make him feel, from an early age, shielded from life's hazards and dangers, to judge himself sincerely beyond the ordinary vicissitudes of the world, finding little attraction in the quiet, unglamorous business of a peaceful sovereignty that deals with paperwork? The upbringing Sebastian received, lacking parents' restraint in the absence of father and mother, raised by grandparents who were soon removed from day-to-day guidance, could hardly supply firm direction. In the minds of the Portuguese courtiers of the mid-16th century, glorious aims meant reconquering the lands stolen by the enemies of the faith, who had brazenly taken some of the fortress towns of North Africa, abandoned by the Portuguese during the rule of João III. But did anyone seriously take steps to make the king equal to his grandfather in his non-belligerency? From what we can tell of the interventions, only Philip II, uncle of Sebastian, genuinely tried, even at the last, to curb D. Sebastião's marked bellicosity. He failed. Sources of encouragement kept appearing, feeding into D. Sebastião that taste for fair retaliation, a call he felt compelled to answer. D. Sebastião was born at the Paço da Ribeira on the 20th of January 1554. His father, Prince D. João, died on the 2nd of the same month. For 18 days, prayers were held across the kingdom for the favorable outcome of the birth of Princess D. Joana. At that moment, D. Sebastião would become, for the time being, the principal obstacle to uniting the crowns under one head. If the ruling social groups, and especially the family, had nothing against that outcome, the popular groups, perhaps for other reasons, were less inclined to accept a union. On the regency front, the roles assigned to advise and assist Queen D. Catarina were the result of a complicated struggle among palace factions. With Queen D. Catarina in the regency, Portuguese politics drew yet closer to Castilian influence. Philip II, already reigning after Charles V's abdication, still remained the son of the emperor whose presence at Yuste affected family life and politics. When Charles V died in 1558, Philip II naturally assumed that patriarchal primacy. The heir to the young King of Lisbon was Prince D. Carlos, son of Philip II, and the Portuguese Infanta D. Maria, heir also to other peninsular thrones. At the time, there was no pressing reason to dwell on this, though Charles V advocated immediate oaths of allegiance to his other grandson, D. Carlos, as heir. By agreement between D. Catarina and D. Henrique, Father Luis Gonçalves de Câmara, a Jesuit who later also became the king's confessor, was chosen as the king's tutor. Also present was Aleixo de Meneses. At court, there was then an intention to give the king a solid humanistic education, combined with no less a strong sense of duty and martial honor. Hence, the choice of both a Jesuit and a soldier to help the king mature. Those closest to him had ties, practically or in spirit, with the African strongholds and military deeds, with India and the East and the harshness of combat. A fair religious fervor also accompanied the king's education. With the Council of Trent, Portugal, under D. Sebastião's reign, in 1564, accepted and incorporated all conciliar decrees into its internal legal order. Throughout the king's life, the dynastic problem remained present. There were many attempts to arrange a marriage. The best candidate was a French match. That would secure Brazil against French designs to establish a France Antarctique, ease commercial relations, notably bread supplies, and calm the obsessive fear of a peninsular union. Even the diplomacy of the Holy See, after first seeking a bride from the German emperor's family, became directly interested in a French marriage. For reasons of family loyalty, some favored a Castilian match, or at least a union with the House of Habsburg. That choice would not have been especially dangerous between 1568, death of Prince D. Carlos, and 1576, death of D. Duarte. D. Sebastião, most likely because of illness, did not resolve the matter, despite dealing with it. Moreover, foreign interference in this area was obvious, so a strong-willed and stubborn personality, such as D. Sebastião's, could not be expected simply to accept others' wishes as if his will didn't count. In this matter, he was treated as a dynastic political piece of the Habsburgs, where Philip II was seen as the leader of the family, while Catherine of Austria was seen as his collaborator in Portugal. D. Sebastião grew up among priests and knights until reaching legal majority, attained in 1568. Interests clashed over the regency, conflicts that led, in 1562, to the replacement of D. Catarina by Cardinal D. Henrique. Much of the intrigues and of the political path have to do with personal rivalries that escape observation. Few things are as evident in the political crisis that accompanies change. It seems that the high administration and the bureaucracy of the higher courts were preparing to assume a new mediating role, with relative independence from the royal person. The Desembargo do Paço, High Court of Appeal, constituted itself as an organism with its own president, when, until then, only the king presided. And this first president would be D. João de Melo, a prelate knowledgeable in the procedural legal intricacies, with excellent proofs of competence in the Holy Office. Against the novelty of a tribunal with a president, when until then, only their majesties had been so, those men arose who had served directly under King João III. The bureaucracy in formation now found the opportunity to consolidate itself. Foreign policy became one of the fields in which factions clashed. D. Catarina represented the connection and subordination to Hispanic interests, as Philip II was defining them. D. Henrique preferred a cautious alignment, often distant or ambiguous. Not being hostile to his nephew of Castile, he inclined toward a political relationship with adjustments and careful weighing of interests, different from the position of his sister-in-law. And on his side, he could count on the clear support of the high administration, which, unlike D. Catarina, was more closely tied to dedicated servants of the crown, such as Pero d'Alcazova Carneiro. This man was dismissed in 1567. A confidant of D. Catarina and Princess D. Joana, mother of D. Sebastião, who Madrid never ceased trying to influence in Portuguese politics with an understandably Castilian outlook, he later shared confidences with Cristóvão de Moura, who not long afterward would help even more. With the regency over, the ministers closest to the government were those recommended by Cardinal D. Henrique. Among them was Luis da Silva. D. Catarina still attempted to intervene, through her confidants and from Castile. D. Henrique resisted energetically, while at the same time showing himself reconciliatory and careful not to break ties with the Dowager Queen. In 1569, D. Caterina died. D. Sebastião, who had long been considered a prodigy child, by then a young man of 15 years, took over the government. He immediately surrounded himself with young courtiers of his own age, turning away from the experienced counselors. The king personally sought to command the kingdom's administration. He manifested early signs of a warrior-like piety, linked to the crusading ideals that the atmosphere of the time required. He nurtured a dream of expansion of the faith through reconquest against Muslim invaders, a dream in which he found the meaning of his life and his reign. From then on, the whole of national politics would revolve around the personality and destiny of the monarch. After 1572, politics was carried out by Alcatova until 1578. The governments were reorganized after the 1574 reform, the most important of his reign, which reorganized the council system. After the so-called Long Regency of Cardinal D. Henrique, a young king was now in power, but he was not ready for the hardships of government life. The king's policies were influenced by Father Luis Gonçalves de Câmara, the new confessor from the Company of Jesus, replacing Father Antonio de Quadros. As a consequence, the king strengthened the role of the Holy Office in the repression of heresies. The atmosphere of religious importance, nourished by the Society of Jesus, prepared the king to realize the old project of a crusade in North Africa, so that Christian lands would be reconquered. It became clear that if he died without a direct heir, the succession would become an open question, which raised concerns not only among the Portuguese nobility, but also in the Spanish court. For this reason, the Duke of Guimarães, Di Duarte, was not pleased that the king, at barely 24 years of age, wanted to embark on the expedition to Morocco. Despite the fact that he could count on Portuguese and Castilian forces, and that he had secured promises of assistance from Italy, the undertaking was seen as being very difficult. In Castile in 1576, King Philip II of Spain was preparing for possible Turkish attacks. In December of that year, news arrived of the death of Sultan Selim and the rise to the Ottoman throne of his son Murad, a man reputedly even more belligerent than his father. At the same time, the Saadian Sultan of Morocco, Muhammad al-Mutawakkil, better known as Muley Maluko, was waging a civil war against his uncle, who had the support of the Turks. D. Sebastião saw in this conflict an opportunity to establish a Portuguese protectorate over the region, thus placing Portugal in a position to impede the Turks from expanding. The king intended to conquer the throne of Morocco for Muley Maluko in exchange for the recognition of Portuguese supremacy. It was a bold plan to end a civil war by installing a client sovereign under Portuguese protection. The enterprise required a strong army. D. Sebastião gathered about 16,500 men, Portuguese, Castilians, Italians, and Germans, and a large number of volunteers. His army had a total of 23,000 men. The fleet was organized in the ports of Lisbon. On 24th June, 1578, the fleet set sail for Africa. Before the end of July, it anchored at Arzila. After a week of rest, the army marched toward Al-Kakher Kibir. D. Sebastião wanted to begin military actions, marching far inland, beyond the rivers and difficulties. His goal was to travel overland with the greatest risk of his life and of the enterprise. To that end, he chose to disembark at Arzila and move toward Larache, reconquering Al-Kakher Kibir along the way. He was driven by the possibility of provoking a pitched battle with the Sharif. This one was ready, gathering in the field, surrounded by vassals of his own, thereby removing the delays and indecision of the Portuguese king in assembling and bringing together his troops. Only a few days passed before the dethroned Muley Muhammad abandoned the Portuguese baggage train with the hope of choosing sides. The battle took place near Alcácer Quibir. The Moroccan army had 60,000 to 100,000 men, while the Portuguese had little more than 20,000. Sebastian was thus heavily outnumbered. The youngest of the three kings present, the shortage of supplies, the disordered command structure, the low number of men, and the weariness of the march across Africa are seen as the main reasons for Sebastian's defeat. All the kings present, on both sides, would die in the battle. Muley Abd al-Malik, the rival of Sebastian, died at the height of the battle. Muley Muhammad drowned in a stream that caught fire. D. Sebastião fought bravely and was killed in combat. Thus ended what became known as the Battle of Alcácer Quibir. There was no shame in defeat, because the cause was noble. Portugal was heavily outnumbered on the battlefield, and the king died fighting beside his men. Meanwhile, 394 years earlier, when the Moroccan Caliph Yusuf I invaded Portugal, besieging Santarém, he died from his wounds, after being carried away from the battle by his men, who heavily outnumbered the besieged Portuguese, and still lost. Returning to the 1570s, the old cardinal, Dom Henrique, was mourned with tears. He became the new king of Portugal, Dom Henrique I,